Welcome to another episode of Black Folks Doing Extraordinary Things, a series dedicated to highlighting some of the amazing, atypical things that Black people from all walks of life are doing to better our world. Today, I'm here with Dr. Taisonbell, who is a critical care and infectious disease physician and professor. He is also the co-founder of Owl Peak Labs, whose mission is to save lives by simplifying early stage colon cancer diagnostic imaging through the use of technology. So, Dr. Bell, thank you again so much for joining me. Like I said, this is going to be a very casual conversation. So to start, let's get into just a really quick intro. We know your name, obviously, but you can feel free to reiterate it yourself, your age if you're comfortable, where you're based, and then just more about your work.
Sure. So, Tyson Bell, as you said, I'm 38 years old and I practice in the University of Virginia, which is in Charlottesville, Virginia. And my job is pretty all over the place, really, when it boils down to it. And I guess I kind of like it that way. But from a clinical care standpoint, most of my time is devoted to taking care of patients who are critically ill in the intensive care unit. So this is the part of the hospital where the sickest patients go. So if either you need machines to sustain your life, or if you're a threat of that, or really bad infection, shock, and cardiac arrest when the heart stops. Those are kind of the conditions I take care of. And then I practice a little smaller part of infectious disease where I see patients with serious infections who are hospitalized for those problems. So that's the clinical side of what I do. And then on the administrative side, I am the director of the medical ICU. So I handle some of the quality issues that come through the ICU, things like balancing the workforce, professionalism issues, purchase equipment, things like that. And then I have a couple of roles in the hospital quality division, looking over our care of sepsis, which is really bad infections that can lead to people dying, unfortunately. You want to have protocols in place to make sure that they run the right way. So I'm in charge of making sure that those are run the right way. And then I direct a leadership program for pre-medical students that are interested in becoming physicians that are from disadvantaged backgrounds. And that program happens every summer. It's actually going on right now. We have 28 students that are coming through virtually, unfortunately, this year because of the pandemic. But seeing how doctors work and getting some leadership training along with some standardized test prep. And then the last but not least, I'm a co-founder and co-CEO of Owl Peak Labs, a startup that I started with a co-resident or co-classmate when I was a student at the Darden School of Business at UVA. So my day is just full of meetings from all sorts of places, or I'm doing clinical care. I like it that way. It's
Yes.
fun.
I love it. There's quite the variety. So how do you manage to sort of juggle all of these moving parts? I was going to say, what does a typical day look like? But I imagine there isn't one, right?
Yeah, there really isn't a typical day, and I think when um, I had to recognize early on that I'm just one person, and in order to be successful, I have to rely on others.
Yeah.
It's not a foreign concept when it comes to clinical care because care of patients is so complex. You have to rely on consultants, and your nursing staff is just as important as everyone else. Your medical students even can contribute. So that environment kind of primed me for knowing how to rely on people and get the best performance out of them. But when you transition that to the entrepreneurial space, that really is that much more important because there are certain things and certain commitments I just can't commit to, or I
Yeah.
just don't have that skill set. And it takes being humble enough to recognize, hey, I can't do this well, or maybe I can do it okay, but I don't have the time to really commit, and I really need help with this sort of heavy lift. Being able to do that really is how I manage. And I'm not good on email. I make
Sure.
that clear to everyone. So people know that they really need to get in contact with me, send me a text message or anything that's a real time messaging service like Slack, WhatsApp, text message always works better than email. And the people who work with me frequently know that. So, one of those things like, recognizing your weaknesses,
Yeah, so
definitely is
important.
one of mine, but having workarounds or people to kind of step into those blind spots are really how I've managed to move ahead. I still feel like most of the time I'm
Hmm.
not doing a good enough job,
Sure.
but things are still moving. So I
Yeah.
think that makes me happy at the end of the day.
For sure. Yeah, no, it happens. It's hard, but I think it's good to be high. It's good to
Thanks.
be introspective and just have a sense of, what your strengths and weaknesses are. Ooh, we have a friend joining us.
Yep. Yeah.
So what do you enjoy most about your work? I mean, I know there are so many different aspects of it, but if you
Mhm.
had to pick maybe one or two things that like you have to have that keep you driving forward, what are those things?
Yeah, I think, one thing that I really enjoy about what I do is that it's very tangible to explain the benefit of the work that I do. And what I mean
Sure.
by that is when I come home or and talk to my family or my friends, and I tell someone about what I do, and I can tell a story about someone in the ICU, and there's usually something relatable there. That someone either themselves or a family member or a grandparent has been sick and been in intensive care, and so there's that immediate sort of recognition of the value that I add. So I enjoy that part of it. The other
Yeah.
part, we touched on this earlier, is that in order to be a good clinical team leader in my environment means that you have to rely on others. And so I spend just as much time thinking about what I want to do for a patient as I do on thinking, what do these other people want to do and what's their input.
Sure.
And when we're standing in a circle, literally rounds or a circle, where we have therapists, nurses, physicians in various stages of training, and myself leading the team, where we're all trying to figure out what's the best thing to do for the patient. And because of traditional hierarchical structure, a lot of times there's deference to me, but this is better with groupthink. And so if I can extract that value from others, then I feel like I'm doing the best job that I can do, and I'm getting the
Sure.
best outcome for the patient. And then for the long term, I feel that um, a lot of people who gain satisfaction in their career create something. And it doesn't have to be like a company or,
Sure.
anything like that, but a
Hmm.
project or an initiative, something that they can say, this is what I did and created that didn't exist before.
Yeah.
And for me, Outpeak Labs is that outlet to create something that will have a larger impact on patient care as a whole, not just limited to what I personally do on a day-to-day basis. But this is a
Right.
project that hopefully will change lives, save thousands of lives.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about people like Chadwick Boseman and Ibrahim Kendi, who have
Yeah.
early stage colorectal or early colorectal cancer,
Yeah.
trying to decrease those disparities. And if I can have an impact on that, that's very gratifying.
Absolutely. That's awesome. In contrast, what would you say you enjoy least about what you do?
Yeah, I think it's a stressful job, and I'll just be honest about that. One of the things that I do see a lot of are death and people passing away, unfortunately. And I rationalize that by saying that it's something that we all have to go through, obviously.
Right.
And if it has to happen, at the very least, you want it to be in peace and quiet, with hopefully surrounded by loved ones with no pain. And if I can, at the end of the day, say that someone who was under my care, I wasn't able to save their life, but they passed away with dignity and with comfort, then I can say that that was a win for whatever that's worth. But it's still draining, and particularly, you know, you see young people who are sick from bad, cancers and things like that. COVID
Yeah.
19 has put a whole other wrinkle on this. But to see people who you may personally identify with, in
Yeah. Yeah.
late 30s, early 40s, young family with these terrible situations, those sort of weigh on you a little bit. So they can take a lot out of you at the end of the day. And so that's one of the things that I would say that probably puts a timestamp on my career, to be honest,
Yeah.
that I don't see myself doing the clinical care side in the ICU for the rest of my life, because I think there's only a limited amount of you know, there's only a limited amount of that I can take.
Absolutely.
And if I realize that now, I can plan for what those next steps are going to be, and hopefully building some of those roadways now.
Definitely. Absolutely. So, how did you get into this work? Did you know, like, from childhood that you wanted to be a doctor? Was there a transitional point? What got you here?
Well, I would say that from go find mommy, okay? She can give you something to eat. Well, I knew that I wanted to be a physician from an early age. I was probably 5 or 6 years old. I had asthma when I was a child,
Okay.
I was frequently in the doctor's office getting treatment for that. and because of that, I had regular exposure to the medical profession. I got to know the pediatricians very well and followed them around, and actually enjoyed going to that environment. Told them I want to be
Yeah.
a physician, and they kind of fed that dream. I also had a black dentist in my neighborhood who I grew up in an underserved neighborhood, predominantly black community, and we had a dentist who I went to, who I also told I wanted to be a doctor, and he started calling me Dr. Bell,
I love
and
that.
actually
Manifesting.
exactly wrote it in the chart. So when I
Yeah.
showed up, he would say, Dr. Bell, you can come back and we can take a look at it and see if you have any cavities. Then I saw in the chart like Dr. Bell, comes for his, whatever visit, and he literally wrote it into existence. And feeding that dream was something that benefited me because I didn't see many or any people who were physicians in my neighborhood, or people who grew up to become, go into that profession. So that helped me a lot. As far as the specific work that I do now, that was more discovery about the things that I personally like and don't like. And what I
Sure.
mean by that is, everyone who says they want to be a physician probably has a vision of what that's going to look like. And most of the time, that involves taking care of patients. And I had always envisioned for myself, I'll be a physician. I come from an underserved community, so I will most likely work in an underserved community and do primary care in a community like that. Somewhere similar to where I grew up. And that's kind of the vision that I had for myself going into medicine.
Sure.
Problem is, once I started doing that work, I realized I just didn't enjoy it as much. I think outpatient care is a very different animal than inpatient care, and there's lots of documentation and lots of things you deal with outside of the medical practice.
Okay.
There's a lot of people, power to them if you can tolerate that, but it wasn't something that I enjoyed, and so I had to reconcile this vision of what I wanted to be with what I actually enjoyed. What I enjoyed was inpatient medicine, and infectious disease was one of the things that I really was attached to on the inpatient side, but the outpatient side just didn't click for me at all.
Right.
So when it was time to figure out, well, how do I take this career? I trained in infectious disease first, and I was going to stop it there, but I hit this crossroads where I felt that I could continue on this path and be decently happy, but I wouldn't be completely fulfilled. And I had a choice, and I knew that I enjoyed the ICU. I didn't think that doing ICU practice was something I wanted to do because it's so intense. Intense is in the name of it. For
Sure.
God's sake.
Yes.
So I actually avoided it, but I just gravitated towards it, taking care of these patients. And I just had to be real with myself. And I met someone who had done infectious disease and critical care who said, this might be a good career path for you. And if you go into academia, then that's a way that you can kind of control what your work looks like. I decided to do extra training. I didn't want to do a second fellowship, but in the
Sure.
end, I said, if I take this step and then say, this isn't for me, I won't be happy with that decision. But if I don't do it and later on say, I should have done this, I would have regretted that more.
Yeah.
So it was somewhat of a risk, and to do more training and forego some of that income. I ultimately decided to do critical care training at the NIH. And it was a great decision, and I molded the career that I wanted. And so, because of that, I had more career options, more flexibility, more self determination in what I wanted to do. And because I work in academic medicine and have fellows and residents and trainees, I can have other pockets of space dedicated to other things. So traditional
Sure.
academia, that would be like, writing research grant proposals and doing symposiums and things like that. For me, that means some of the administrative and quality work as long as the entrepreneurial work that I do.
Got it. Okay. Awesome. Awesome. I'm seeing this kind of pattern of just having those like introspective check-ins with yourself to see like, is
Yeah.
this still aligned with what I want? Does it make sense? So hopefully folks listening will kind of catch on to that in terms of just finding your career path. I know a lot of people struggle with that and that uncertainty,
Yeah.
but it sounds like a lot of it is just based on self-reflection.
Just
Um,
recognizing that you
yeah,
evolve along the process. And so
yeah,
what drove you before may not be what drives you now, and what drives you now may not be what drives you in the future.
yeah.
And recognizing that you do have some agency and you can exercise that. But recognizing that you have that agency and knowing when to go in another direction
Yeah.
might make you a little uncomfortable, but ultimately might lead to more satisfaction. That was really the theme for me.
Absolutely, absolutely. So you kind of touched on it a bit, but I'm curious to know more about how, how do you think your identity as a Black individual, as a Black professional, has impacted your work and your role, and just your journey overall?
Yeah, I love being a Black physician. Man, uh,
Yes.
especially growing up in a neighborhood where there weren't many like me, and knowing that I can walk into a room and change someone's perception of what a physician is. That has so much power for me,
Yeah.
and knowing that because there's so little representation, I'm working in a program to try to correct that, but because there's so little representation, my personal um, uh, goal every day is when I interact with a patient, with a colleague, I want to be the best physician that they've ever interacted with, bar none. Without question. And if I, put in the work to do that, then the next person who comes along who looks like me is going to get that positive kind of sort of assumption that comes along with having worked with me. That drives me as well. I had this one story because black black physicians will tell you this all the time that when they come into a room and introduce themselves, a lot of times they're mistaken for anyone but a physician.
Yes. I hear it all the time.
And being mistaken for a transport person or something like that happens so frequently. There was this one time I just started as an attending at UVA, and I walked to a room of a patient I had transported in by helicopter because they were pretty sick, but they were able to kind of interact with me.
Sure.
And I walked in and they were being pleasant. They weren't trying to be rude or anything like that. But they said, "Oh, are you here to transport me down to the CAT scan?" And I said, "No, I'm actually the person who decided to bring you here by helicopter." So one of those moments where I get to correct that narrative
Yes.
and kind of reaffirm my humanity and what I do. But I didn't feel the need to kind of dwell on it. It was just one of those moments where I respectfully check them and then I
Yes.
just move on with doing the work that I need to do. And,
Yeah.
I just love moments like that when I have trainees who are from non-traditional backgrounds or look different,
Right.
and patients may call them out on that, and I get to reaffirm them in that moment. I enjoy having experiences like that because as a leader of the team, you get to set that tone for how your team's going to function. And therefore, if you set that example that we will reaffirm people's value and worth in every chance where it comes up when that's insulting, then that's the most affirming thing that the people that work with you can have.
Definitely, definitely. Have you ever found it to be a challenge to have to kind of navigate the medical space as a Black person? Aside from people making those assumptions, have you ever had any like real clashes with that?
Yeah, I think the reality is it is difficult, and moments. A lot of it is told in stories and moments, but there's a daily sort of grind to it too that affects you that you may not even recognize. And
Hmm.
being in predominantly white spaces or predominantly not your spaces, and having a leadership role in them can sometimes be isolating. And when issues of discrimination or racism, sexism, all the other isms come up, and you are the underrepresented person in the room, then all the eyes kind of go to you.
Right.
And I don't always want to carry that banner all the time. Sometimes I just want to, do what I want to do,
Yeah.
sign my
Just be
notes,
Dr.
go
Bill.
home. Yeah, just sign my notes and go home, and
Yeah.
don't bother me. And so I pick and choose where I have my battles, and because of that, I preserve some energy for myself and for my family. And so, having those moments where you decide, I could go in on this interaction, but the value of it relative to protecting my mental is just not worth it. But then when I do strike and go after something, I go at it with just force. And so it's like mama mentality. So like if I'm
For
in a
sure.
room and something stupid comes up from a policy standpoint, I'm going to go in on it and attack it hard.
Yeah.
And because I save that energy for the big moments, I'm able to kind of persevere. I have colleagues who also will speak out every time, all the time against every single issue, and that comes at a cost. You do get marginalized sometimes, and I think
Yeah.
that's the calculus that a lot of black professionals have to do. That you can be the black person in the room screaming, and even if you want to do that, in most instances, that's not in your best interest to do that. And so I have my professional circle of friends, my black physician friends, and we talk every day about things that happen, sharing tweets and stuff like that. And we
Sure.
talk about these issues, and we work out, strategically how we handle the things that come across. And a lot of times it's, I got this email, what would you say to this or something like that, or this
Mm.
policy came up, what would you say? And a lot of it is just figuring out, that the concept of WB Du Bois, the two sides, that still plays out today, unfortunately.
Right, right. Ugh, so tough. Well, we appreciate you doing the work and putting up the good fight. A couple more questions here for you. I know it's generally pretty straightforward for people to get into the medical industry, but are there any steps or actions that you would recommend or advise someone to do or to take if they're interested in your specific line of work?
Yeah, I think the most important thing to recognize, it is a tough profession to get into, just in the sense that there's a lot of testing, a lot of prerequisites, and a lot of training that happens. I think what happens with a lot of underrepresented minorities, and I was at risk of this too, is trying to put into context your failures. We say this all the time, that you're defined by how you respond to your failures and your successes. But when we affirm people in society, all we tend to talk about are their successes. When we introduce speakers and and other leads, we talk about all the positive things that they've done, but we almost never talk about their failures. Even if we're
Sure.
saying you're not defined by your failures, we're defining people by their successes. And so what I tell my students is, behind everyone who's been successful, there's at least 5 times the amount of failure that they're not sharing with you. And I actually have a failure CV, or I call it an anti CV, where I just outline all the things that I failed at, personally and professionally, just to show them that there's this side that just demonstrates that I responded to my failure, and that's what defined my own success. Now, take that back to how to handle the classes, the coursework, when you get bad grades on tests. What a lot of us tend to do is internalize that failure and say, and use it as a means to question ourselves and our worth and our ability to achieve that dream.
Sure.
In reality, what we need to do is take it as a sign that we either need to change our study method or try a different track to get to where we want to go. It could be a sign that you are more lean towards something else. But what you don't want to do is take that and take it to mean that you don't deserve to be in the profession. I think a lot of underrepresented minorities get screened out at these stages because they may have trip ups along the way. I certainly did. But if you don't have that positive affirmation or
Yeah.
strong internal validation, then you may take that as a sign to exit the profession prematurely.
Understandable. Okay, that's good advice and helpful. Any final words or anything else that you'd like to share that we didn't cover?
I think we covered the main things. The theme, keeps emerging of the self-discovery and
Yeah,
introspection. I think being able to do that is so important, especially for Black professionals, underrepresented professionals, because so much of our time is dedicated to either our professional space and navigating the spaces that we are in. That being able to have an honest conversation with yourself about what's driving you, what's motivating you, how you internally validate yourself is just so important. And I can honestly tell you, in 5 years from now, I really don't know what I'll be doing. But what I do know is that it'll be something that I want to do, and that I've decided is the direction I want to go. I might have to have a courage conversation with myself to
sure.
do that leap. I think, the
Yeah.
biggest step for me is going to be when I leave full-time clinical practice. I do think I'll stay in clinical practice for some time, but probably downgrade at some point heavily.
Yeah.
But taking that leap is a big one. And so much of my identity is tied to taking care of patients. but I know at some point I am going to have to stop doing that. And, when I decide to do that, the opportunity may come before I'm ready for it.
Right.
I need to be ready to take that leap nonetheless. So that's my ongoing sort of conversation with myself as I'm like doing the entrepreneurial thing and doing all the administrative stuff. All the things that we have to be prepared for.
Absolutely. Change and growth are inevitable. So.
Exactly.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you again, Dr. Bell. This was great. I will be linking some information about Dr. Bell below in the description. But otherwise, hope to see you all back here again soon for another episode of Black Folks Doing Extraordinary Things. Thanks so much again.
Thank you.